remember when Final Fantasy VII first came out on the Sony PlayStation back in 1997. Before that, I was big into playing just sports games like Madden or action games or whatever it may be, especially on Nintendo. But I never really been into the JRPG scene until this game. After this game came out and Sony would come out with different hardware systems, it seemed like every single year we'd hope that maybe a Final Fantasy VII remake would happen, that there was a chance for it, that we would get an updated graphical version of it instead of the original chibi style of graphics. And every single year we didn't get it until finally when Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced. Now, one of my big concerns for this game was that it was going to be a remake and not just a remaster of the game. And eventually we got word that it was going to be split up into 3 parts, which also had me kind of worried because how are they going to split it up and divide it? And really early on, we learned that basically Final Fantasy VII Remake is a lot of Midgar. Like a lot of Midgar. In the original game, Midgar, if you sped through it, was like a couple hours. If you took your time in the original OG game, it was probably about 10 hours, maybe a little bit more than that. And we all kind of wondered how it would turn out to be in a 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever hour game it would be. How are you going to spend that much time in Midgar? And this was my biggest worries coming into the game. Now, I will say that the beginning of the game starts off really strong. Really just getting to really live that world, relive those experiences, not only with updated graphics, but just with the voice acting on top of it. Just everything about it just brings back good memories. The new soundtrack that's been kind of redone, it sounds phenomenal. It's absolutely amazing. And it's amazing work overall that they have done with just bringing it up to the level that it is now. I will say one of my biggest concerns with the game, though, is the middle section, right? Act 2 of the game. There's a lot of just kind of running back and forth. You're just going on random quests and going through the sewers one way to only come back another way. For random characters that maybe didn't really have a big role in the original Final Fantasy VII or are just made up now have larger roles. For example, we have the whole Final Fantasy VII remake bike fight against Roche. The whole motorcycle fight that you have with him is just kind of over the top and doesn't really fit right for me. It just feels kind of weird. I'm not a big fan of that boss fight, and just the inclusion of this very random character who, if he was in the original Final Fantasy game, I don't remember him at all. The same kind of goes with Johnny, the Sector 7 resident in the game. I vaguely remember Johnny. Like, I know he's in the game, but he's obviously not as important. Maybe because I just don't pay attention that much to some of the minor characters, but that's neither here nor there. But it was stuff like that where it just felt like they were included to just kind of be in there, and to like not even flesh out the story, but just literally to pad on time, right? We go through this whole other side quest later on where we are working with Leslie to get something back that's personal of theirs, right? And the quest line is fine, right? It's a fine addition to the story, but it doesn't really add much to the overall narrative. And it feels like, again, just we're kind of padding extra time here, right? What they did with Don Corneo was good. I think all the updates with him was fun. I think that was fine. I think trying to get into the whole Coliseum and do the fighting, I think that was fine. I think that was exciting. Everything with Sector 7 that they made you do, I think was fine. But it was just certain quests in the middle were a little bit rough. And I'm going to go right back to, I think personally, the Leslie more or less fetch quest. It wasn't even really a fetch quest, but just going back and forth quest with him in the sewers. It was the one time in this game where I just put it down and didn't play it for several weeks at that point, because it just felt like we were just adding on something for absolutely no reason. And that was one of the things that I didn't really enjoy about the game, was that part of it. And this was the biggest worry about Final Fantasy VII Remake, in my opinion, was how are you going to pad out the time? Again, we're making it 3 times longer than it really should be. Maybe not even really what it should be, but what it was. And that has to come somewhere. I mean, voice acting, yes, can slow things down a bit. Over the top scenes can slow things down a bit. And that's fine. We did this also in the train graveyard scene, right? That section of the game is not super long, but it's kind of long. And it got much longer in the remake. And I think it wasn't terrible. I think that actually the fights were pretty interesting. But again, it felt like, okay, this is a section of the game that shouldn't take too long, but now it's taking a super long time because they want to kind of fill this out a little bit more. I would have really enjoyed if they kind of went a bit further of the ending of this game. I'm not going to talk about specifically what the end is, but I wish they would have kind of went a little bit further past the storyline point than they did. I think they wouldn't have had to stretch out so much, and that would have helped the game more overall, in my opinion. One of the other additions to this game was the whole Dementors, I think we can call them, or Whispers in this game that they added on. That's like this big mystery in the beginning, and you later on figure out more or less what they're about and why they're there. It didn't add much. I'll just say that much. It wasn't anything that really worked up to anything grand or great. It literally just felt like it was extra plot added on for no reason. It was kind of built up to be maybe a little bit more than what they actually were going to be, but they didn't really end up being much in the end. Now, I don't know if they have more going on in the second game, maybe they make an appearance again. I don't really think so, but maybe they do. But yeah, it was one of those weird things that right away, obviously, as a fan of the original game, it's going to hit you right away that this feels different, right? This doesn't feel exactly the same as how it used to be. And you figure maybe there's a big payoff reason for this. Maybe there's a big something for this. And there really isn't. There really isn't a big something at the end of that, which kind of stinks, but it is what it is at this point. And I will say also one of the big differences with this game is near the end with the final boss sequence. I know some people had some issues with the final boss. I actually didn't mind it, especially the final boss. I think it was really interesting and a really fun fight. I'm happy they included it. I don't want to give any spoilers away for it, but I think that whole sequence at the end was a lot of fun and it was really good. Now, I will say the overall experience of the game was great, and then it wasn't great, and then it was great again, right? I feel like that was kind of my overall play of Final Fantasy VII Remake, is that I really enjoyed the beginning. I was crushing through the first probably 8 to 10 hours, and then it really felt like the next like 5, 6, 7 hours were kind of a drag, right? That middle section was kind of a drag, and it would pick up now and again, and it would slow back down, pick back up and slow back down, especially parts where the story, just wasn't really advancing because we had to go do a side quest, something that should have been a side quest, but ended up being part of the main story anyway. One of the other things too is since finishing the game, there's not really a new plus game, right? You don't play again, but you can select the chapters in the game and replay those chapters, which is actually an interesting way to do it. I've actually really enjoyed that part of it. The quote unquote new game plus extra stuff, whatever you want to call it, after you defeat or finish the main game has actually been really exciting. Doing all of Chadley's quests is actually pretty neat, and I actually like it. I know some people really don't like Chadley's side stuff he has you doing, and he's kind of like, he kind of sticks out, and story wise, he's a little weird, but he's actually not terrible, I think. Again, what you have to do for him isn't too bad, but once you go through all of his quests, you do all the side quests, you do the Coliseum at Don Corneo's, all that stuff, there's a lot to do after the fact, and then there's an extra hard mode that you can just level up your characters and really grind them out to make them super powerful, go through the game and collect different things and get different materia, especially at the end there. It's been a nice end game sequence. I've really enjoyed that part of it. And I think I've spent more time just kind of grinding out there at the end and enjoying it more for that portion of the game than I did for the middle. So in the end, what do I think about Final Fantasy VII Remake? I don't really love that it's a trilogy. I'll be completely honest. It feels, again, like they're stretching a lot out. Now, with Rebirth coming out, I don't know if they're going to be stretching out more there or they're going to have to compress a lot, because the problem is if you stretch out the next section of basically the disc, there's a lot left for the third game to cover, so we'll eventually do a review of Rebirth and talk a bit about it and see what we think about it. But I think for a standalone game by itself, I think it's good. I think it's a good game. I think there are some faults with it. I think, again, the Act 2 part of the story is a bit slower. It's not as exciting. But I think if you grew up loving Final Fantasy VII and loving the OG game, you're going to want to go through this. You're going to want to play it because it is nostalgic. It is really good. And the certain systems they have are really exciting and really fun. I think if you're never played a Final Fantasy game ever, I think it's actually not a bad starting point to have, and that's because of the combat. Now, really quick, just touching on the combat, traditional Final Fantasy VII was always turn-based combat. So you would select an action, and then your turn, you would go into an order queue, and you eventually do your action, and so on and so forth. The enemy would do theirs, and your teammates, and all that fun stuff. This, it's more active, right? It's more quote unquote button mashing of the attack button, and then throwing in some skills to cause stagger, and then that allows you to do big damage, and then get limit breaks and summons and all that fun stuff. I'm not the biggest fan of this combat. I like the traditional turn-based combat style, but over time, this style did grow on me, and I did think it kind of fit the game overall all right. It's, again, not my favorite. I think they've done a better job with Final Fantasy 16 with their combat. This does feel like the newest version of that type of action sequence combat that they're doing for Final Fantasy. It's not as in-depth as 16 was. I think, again, 16 was just did a better job with it overall, which makes sense. The game came out later, but it's one of those things where I wish there was a little bit more to it. It felt very samey overall. Once you figure out a good pattern of attack, you kind of did that same exact sequence on most of your enemies. It changed now and again, but generally speaking, you did kind of that same sequence over and over and over. But if you're new to Final Fantasy games in particular, or even just Final Fantasy VII, and you like that type of combat, it might work out in your benefit, because I know a lot of people like that style of fighting. So yeah, overall, again, I enjoy the game. I enjoy it for what it is. I enjoy Final Fantasy VII. I think it's all really exciting. I think it's all good. I'm excited to play through Rebirth. I'm excited to continue the story. It's a story that means a lot to me. It's just, I think it's a really good story, really well done. And I'm really excited for it. So if you haven't played it, I highly recommend you play Final Fantasy VII Remake. And if you're a fan of the old game, I think there's still a lot here that, even if you really like the old style of how it did things, and you don't want to spend that long in Midgar, I think going in knowing that Act 2 is going to be a little bit slower, and that's all right. There's a lot to do there still. There's a lot to uncover. And again, the end game stuff that you can do is actually pretty good, and it's pretty exciting, and I highly recommend it. So if you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor, make sure to hit the like button, hit subscribe. Really helps with this channel. Really excited for Rebirth, and I will see you all next time.